Welcome to the Money Insights Podcast, where high-income earners come to learn wealth-building strategies that will take them from high income to high net worth. With your hosts, financial and wealth-building experts, Christian Allen and Rod Zabriskie.
Welcome into another episode of the Money Insights Podcast, where we teach you how to invest with benefits. My name's Christian Allen. Here I am with Rodney, the Pod Zabriskie, as usual. Rod, what's going on, man?
Hey, I'm doing great. Good to be alive.
It is good to be alive, indeed. The weather's terrible. We have to give everyone a weather update. At least in my neck of the woods, the weather is terrible. When I say that, it's just like rainy and gray outside, but the sun is shining inside the podcast studio. So
I love
we're in
it.
good shape. Okay, Rod, today we're going to be talking about one of the things that we believe in, the very most. One of the things that we believe in as an organization, Money Insights, and as individuals is investing in alternative assets.
Yes.
So what we're going to talk about today is basically all things alternative asset investing. We're going to talk about what it is, what it isn't. We're going to talk about why it's useful. And maybe most importantly, we're going to focus on why we believe it's a more impactful, more powerful path to creating generational wealth. And I use the word generational wealth because most of the people who are listening to us are already highly successful, high income earners. They're wanting to take things to the next level. And we genuinely believe, and we have a whole lot of proof in our corner suggesting that one of the core elements of doing that is to invest in the alternative asset space. So, Rod, to kick us off, why don't you give us an idea, maybe at least define what alternative asset investing means and kind of what it doesn't mean? That way there's a contextual starting point for everyone.
Yeah. Okay. So let's start with the word alternative. What alternative to what? Right. So what we
to the normal, the traditional.
Traditional. Yes. Yep. So traditional, let's define that first, is really basically anything stock market based, Wall Street, 401ks, the things, if you've heard it a million times from the gurus and your HR director and all of those types of that crowd, then that's traditional. Okay. And alternative is going to be everything else. And I say everything else because it can be a different thing to really anyone. But the point is that you're basically breaking away from what you've always been told is the only way to go, and so you're going to invest in. And we'll get into a more kind of broad examples. But real estate is probably the most common one that we run into, or businesses, right? People, if you own your own business or you invest in other people's businesses, those are pretty common. But notes and funds and all kinds of different things out there that you can invest in and build wealth with, that's what fits into this alternative category.
Yeah, and we always talk about this. It's alternative, which is ironic, being that it's been going along, like it's been the core of what people have invested in for thousands of years.
Right.
So, but somehow along the line, the media got a hold of it and created a different way, which we would call the traditional planning method, right?
Yep.
Okay, and here's the other thing that we would say. The traditional planning method is broken, it's outdated, it's ineffective, it's basically a disaster. And the same way that we have proof suggesting that alternative asset investing is a more impactful way to get to those, get that generational wealth we're looking for. We also, at least anecdotally, we have a huge amount of evidence suggesting that people who are trying to do it exclusively, and maybe that's an important word, exclusively in that the traditional way, are having a much more difficult time getting there. And the reason, some of the reasons we know that is because, well, we know it because we meet with people, right? Yeah. But when we see the media out there, there's all sorts of, messy statistics that suggest that traditional planning is broken. People aren't able to retire. We have way too many people who are getting to that stage of life and still having to figure out ways to make money to work. And again, the reason that that's happening oftentimes is because they're following those methodologies, or at least trying to. One of the things that I think about, Rod, is that the traditional planning method is very unforgiving. In other words, there's not a lot of room to make up ground. So let's just say theoretically, I'm a person that's been working in my W-2 job for my entire life, and I'm really good at I'm really good at saving, but I go through a traumatic accident, I break a bone or something, and suddenly I'm having to dip into my savings, and maybe I can't put money into my 401k anymore. And what happens is like it's going well, or at least we believe it's going well, up until an unfortunate event. So, and most oftentimes, or I should say, at least oftentimes, those events aren't things that we can control. They're out of our control, right? It could be the market taking a massive drop the year before we're ready to retire. I'm that 67-year-old who has had a really great career. I've got all my money in my 401k and various brokerage accounts. And suddenly we see the 2008, and now all of a sudden I've gone from retiring to feeling like I have to work for another 5 years just to live a comfortable. So the point is that there's a whole bunch of things that are making alternative investing really difficult for people. And like I said, it's just really unforgiving. And so the question then is, what can we do instead? And we're suggesting that far and away the better way to do that is the alternative space. And I would suggest that it is a lot more forgiving because there's a lot more opportunity to do things that are, again, you can't do, like creating cash flow, right? We often talk about cash flow methodology versus accumulation methodology. Those are like two hugely different styles of getting to a place of financial freedom. And of course anyway, I got into this with Blake last week, so maybe I won't hit on that anymore, but that's just kind of a little bit of my soliloquy about the problems with traditional planning.
Yeah, and maybe I can hit a little bit more on that piece, because I've heard it described as, do you have a pond or do you have a river, right? In other words, you have maybe your cabin up in the woods and you need a source of water and in order to survive. And so do you have the pond out back where if as you're dipping into it, if you hit a drought, you're in trouble because the rain isn't coming to continually fill the pond? Or do you live near a river where you have this continual flow of water and it doesn't care if there's a drought because the source, there may be some sources that dry up, but you have multiple sources that are continuing to flow down that river. And so in retirement, if you have that cash flow,
I'm loving it, Rob.
Yeah, if you have that cash flow, and again, you still have to be smart about it, right? It's not like you can say, well, I love XYZ type of investment, so I'm just going to put everything I have into that. Well, hard times can hit, and so if you have everything in one basket, again, that's not a great way to go. So you have to be diversified still. You have to have multiple streams of income. But if you'll do that and kind of overbuild a bit to shore up when issues do happen in one sector, then like you said, it's a much more sure way to live out your retirement without worrying about all the problems, completely cutting off your flow to the pond.
The other thing that really stands out to me when we talk about accumulation versus cash flow methodologies, or pond versus river, Rod, is that I can't get over the pond versus the river thing. I don't know how we've been hanging out for this long and I've never heard you talk about the pond and the river.
Yeah, it just came to me in a moment from something I saw.
Okay, well, here's the good news. Not only in the cash flow methodology, the river methodology, Rod, are we getting continual cash flow, but here's the real beauty. And this is, again, so different from our pond. Our river continues to grow in value, even as we're using it all the time, right? If I've got my real estate, I can pull cash flow off it. It can create my financial safety, my safety net. But again, if I'm taking from the pond, I'm always worried about the pond drying up. If I'm taken from the river, I'm never worried about it. And if I've got a really good river, okay, maybe the river methodology doesn't work, or analogy doesn't work as well in the growth side of it. But if I've got a nice piece of real estate, or I've got a portfolio of real estate or other types of assets, I can pull it all the while my underlying assets are growing. So I'm not concerned about, or I'm not nearly as concerned about the possibility of actually running out of money, which of course is the big thing that people are trying to plan for, right?
Right.
The ability to live a comfortable life and not have to worry about money. That's kind of the American dream. And so many people are falling short of that because they're busy trying to do this. And again, something comes up, it could be a medical emergency. Like, I know I went down this road already, but I just think about my own life, Rod. So I'll give you an example. When I had first started in the financial service industry, when I was on the traditional side, I was working hard and I was making okay money. And now my situation was a little different, but I think the principle will highlight what I'm trying to emphasize here. And that is, so going back to this, I'm working hard, I'm doing well. And then I come into a situation where I take my little brother to the trampoline warehouse. It's called Jump On It. Oh, Jump On. I hate Jump On It. Take my little brother to jump on it. I ended up shattering my ankle, right? And it was terrible timing. I had just chosen to lend my mother-in-law money. And so like I had taken some of my savings, feeling like I'm doing really well, no issues there. I give her some money, let her borrow some money, which again, we talk about borrowing money when it comes to family and friends, just plan on giving it to them. But anyway, I let her borrow the money and then I break my leg, and that put me back like a lot because suddenly I had to for a few months, I was basically having to live off of credit cards and things like that. Right. Yeah. So anyway, my point is just to say the traditional planning methodology is broken. It's unforgiving and it's ineffective. And that's why people are still using the incredibly outdated and ineffective 4% rule that I feel like I bring up like once a month. And the only reason I do, Rod, is because it's still out there being used. Like, I hear it. Like, I actually hear it. And it's funny because I feel like for like a decade, we've been talking about how the 4% rule doesn't work. Yeah. And they've been like dropping it down from 4 to like 3.8. And then it goes like 3.2. And then I've seen like 2.8. Yeah. And I'm thinking like, how's anybody going to retire off a 2.8% income multiple, right? I've got to have like 10 million bucks to have a $280,000 income. Like, this is insane.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway.
So I have one other thought though, because as bad as the situation is that you described, like the medical type of stuff or whatever, like you're W-2 and you lose your job and you can't find another one for a year or whatever. Like, as bad as those are, we've seen what I would say is even worse is that when we've seen people, when they get there, they have the nest egg, they've worked hard, they can live off of that nest egg, but it's the fear of those problems coming up that they don't. They live way below what they could because they're just so afraid of depleting the fund. They don't know what's going to happen, and it's that fear of what could happen. Any of the above, right? The medical, whatever, right? The kids needing help, all these different things that just hound them, and it creates this fear of actually using what they built up. And so the 4% rule or the 2.8% turns into less because they don't dare even take that much.
Okay, Rod, we say it all the time, but the 4% rule just means the percentage of money that I take off of my investment. So if I've got $1 million in my 401k and I take 4%, that gives me a $40,000 income. They adjust it for inflation and run it against a bunch of, what's the word? Simulations.
Yep.
Yeah, historical simulations to see what the probability of me having money at the end of my life is, right? And so somehow at some point in time, they came up with the 4% rule, which basically said that this was like a pretty high probability of success. And I don't know, it wasn't 100%, obviously.
No.
If it's 80%, then, you only have a 20% chance of running out of money, which isn't bad. Okay. So So those are some of the limitations that are happening inside the traditional space. I think we've beat that pretty well. Let's kind of change gears and let's talk about what alternative investing is, and maybe specifically we'll define some of the assets that make up alternative investments, and kind of focus on why we believe that it creates a more powerful methodology to get there. And maybe the biggest thing is that it goes back into our core philosophy, right? Yep. The invest with benefits philosophy goes hand in hand with alternative asset investing, because we almost naturally like back our way into leverage, velocity, cash flow, and the other core benefits just by going into that space. They're like baked into it.
Yep.
Right. So it makes it okay. So let's talk about what some of those are, Rod. We're just going to go through our list. We've got real estate. We talk about real estate all the time. We have lots of different types of real estate. And it is for sure the most common asset that we see people investing in. Again, because you can do it in so many different shapes and sizes. But residential, commercial, REITs, we see a lot of people who invest in syndications and multifamily. So we just had Bill on to talk about short-term rentals. Like there's dozens of ways to effectively invest in real estate. Private equity is a big one that we see, and this could be real estate, to be clear. But generally, it's just that coming from a private person that's away from again, like your stocks that are on the exchanges. Precious metals, that's a fun one, Rod. Can I just tell you, I bought $100,000 of gold. I think it was like a year and a half ago. Remember we had Lynette from ITM Trading on.
Yep.
And she inspired me to buy my gold, and it sits comfortably in my safe at my house doing nothing. But can I just tell you, it's nice to have on hand. Except for that it's not very liquid. So that's maybe the bad thing. Cryptocurrency is another one. That's one that obviously has a ton of upside. Everyone knows cryptocurrency, collectibles, art, antiques, cars, other collectibles.
Watches. We hear about all kinds of stuff, right?
Watches. Yeah. We've seen people do all sorts of wild stuff. I have never gotten into the collectibles space, but Rod, we may actually have a sports memorabilia collectibles expert.
Yes, sir.
Hosting one of our next VIP webinars. Okay. Peer-to-peer lending. This is just investing in loans to individuals, businesses through peer-to-peer lending platforms. Hedge funds. We've talked about hedge funds on the podcast. Farmland and agriculture. Man, can I just tell you, the farmland, I've met some pretty dang wealthy farmers in my day. Right. You go out to the farmlands in Idaho, those guys collecting some serious land. And like, instead of sharing, like passing money back and forth, they pass fertilizer back and forth at the farmland.
I love it.
Okay. Startups, Rod. Startups are a fun way to do it. Sustainable investments. We did one on sustainable investing, environmental, social. I'm trying to remember I can't remember the name of like the specific investment style, but anyway, you can do things in the social impact space. Are there any things that I didn't put on the list that I should have, that at least give us a pretty good grouping?
It does give us a good grouping, and maybe I'll mention one. It's not its own category, but it's like a form that can fit against all of these. And you often hear people talk about funds, and basically what that means is, like, if it's a real estate fund or something, then instead of buying into an individual property, the fund has bought into a bunch of them, and now I'm buying into the group of properties. But that can be true of any of these. Like, you see it with collectibles. Obviously, that's kind of what's happening when you talk about private equity or things like that. But but there are a lot of ways you can do that. Like even TribeVest is a way that you can group with other people to go out and do different things. So anyway, I just throw that out there because
there's a lot of innovation around. And the other thing I'll just say here is there has been a lot of innovation in the alternative space. One of the things that has kept people away from it historically is that you kind of needed to be a what's the word, Rod?
Accredited?
Accredited. Thank you. You kind of need to be accredited, which again just means you have a certain level of existing financial security. I don't want to say wealth because it's not like there's a crazy high line, but you needed to be accredited. And one of the beauties of the world that we live in today is there's been enough innovation that even if you're not there, you can still get started. There's a lot of these platforms that don't have the same kind of stipulations of being accredited or having really high minimums.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because there is that stigma out there that that's the only way. Like, you can't really get very far if you aren't there yet. And man, I'm here to tell you, there are a lot of ways you can get involved and get started building towards that point where you become accredited. But don't give up on the dream or the vision just because you're not already accredited.
Good thought. Okay, so here's we talk about our 6 core benefits, Rod. We've got leverage, velocity, cash flow, tax optimization, asset protection, and estate maximization. I talked about how alternative assets naturally flow into or flow back and forth with those core benefits. Mm-hmm. What I want to do is just take a second, not a long time, but take a second and hit on kind of how that works inside of each of these. So leverage is the first one. Leverage, the easiest analogy is real estate, because that's typically how we invest in real estate, right? Yeah. And one of the benefits of one of the huge benefits. Now, I'll say this. I always say this. Leverage is the most powerful wealth building principle that exists because it allows us to do more with our money in a way that we couldn't any other way. So as an example, we always use it. If I've got $100,000 I want to put down, I could buy a $100,000 piece of property and get some income off of it or whatever. Mm-hmm. Or I could put down $100,000, buy a $400,000 property as an example, or $500,000. And now suddenly I have the ability to create value or earn a return on the full $500,000, even though I've only put in $100,000. Yep. That's leverage, right? And again, the ability to do that is unique in that it also creates a situation where the actual return, the return on the actual asset doesn't have to be sky high, right? I can get a 6% return on my real estate, but my actual return because of the money I put in could be significantly higher than that. Right. So again, leverage ends up just being a really powerful way to invest. And the other thing is, one of the things I've noticed is even in these crowdfunding platforms and stuff, when they have the opportunity to utilize leverage, oftentimes they will. We talk about syndication investing, they're still utilizing leverage even in a group situation. So again, it's prevalent enough that it's easy to find. The key, of course, is to do it. We like to say, go out and utilize conservative leverage. Yeah. Right. Certainly want to be safe and smart about how we're using leverage. We want to make sure that we carry cash reserves so that if something doesn't go the way we want to, we have plenty of kind of cushion on the back end. But again, the focus here, leverage ends up growing and ends up giving us the ability to grow assets in a way that we couldn't otherwise.
Absolutely. And I would say maybe the second most common way we see it is in a business. And you're expanding or you're starting up, and using debt is a very common way to magnify or amplify your ability to grow it. And again, do it conservatively, be smart with it. But if you'll do that, then you can do things that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do or as fast.
Yeah. I mean, again, you just think about, let's say that I build out, I build my dental practice and I've got really strong margins. I've got my systems and procedures down. Well, I still may need quite a bit of money to just go out and buy another practice. Well, what if I know that I've got the system, the processes in place, I can go leverage those, not just the money, but the systems and processes, do that again. And now suddenly I'm creating a return that's crazy. So it's hard because in businesses, we can't even put a return on it, right? Yeah. Because oftentimes the return could be 1,000% or something if I'm able to go and, well, anyway, when you create a business that creates cash flow, it really makes a difference. Okay, Rod, why don't you take a minute and talk about, we're going to move to velocity, talk about velocity and how it fits in with alternative assets.
Yeah, absolutely. So velocity is the speed at which we turn over our money and have it back in our hands, ready and available to go out and invest in something else. And every time I describe it, it almost feels like it's like, well, duh, Rod, like high return, get the money, go invest in something else. And so, but sometimes the concept is seems simple, but in practice, putting the systems, having processes in place to make sure that you're turning that around as quickly as possible isn't quite as obvious. And I'll say this, in the alternative investing space, kind of to your point earlier, we can manage the velocity on returns as a lot differently and a lot better than you would in the traditional space. In the traditional space, whatever you have a stock or you have a mutual fund, it appreciates in value, is basically just reinvested in the same place. And it continues to grow. So there's no thought process behind it. But when you're in the alternative space, whether you're a business owner, you're investing in any of these different asset classes we talked about earlier, and you have this cash flow coming back to you, how you manage that cash flow matters tremendously. And so we have things like the investment optimizer to improve that. And it's just being thoughtful, being mindful of, what am I doing with the cash while it's flowing and I'm between deals, in order to get it back out as quickly as possible, but also to have it be working for me in the meantime.
Velocity clicked in for me, Rod, when I think about it this way. And I don't know why this works for me, but it just does. So I picture the idea of putting money into a syndication. I always hear people say, like, velocity is the speed that it takes to get your money back, right?
Mm-hmm.
You get your money back. And I used to think about that and I'd be like, well, of course you want to get, like, that doesn't make any sense, right? So here's when it like clicked in for me. When I started to think you want to get your money back, but still own the underlying asset. And when I think about it that way, it really kind of changed my perspective. So if I'm investing in a real estate syndication and I put $500,000 in there, I want to get my $500,000 back, but I want to continue to have the $500,000 of equity growing in the actual syndicate, right? So once I kind of got that in my head, it stuck, and anyway, the point is get your money back, go out and reinvest it. Like you said, you can, if you do it thoughtfully, generally speaking, you'll have better success. Okay, Rod, cash flow. We've got to have consistent cash flow. Maybe hit on some of the reasons cash flow is important and how it connects to Actually, Rod, I'm going to take it. It's going to take me 30 seconds. Here's the bottom line. Most of the cash flowing assets are alternative assets. Like, I'm trying to think of traditional stuff and like cash flow in the sense that you can bring money out of them. Well, that's what cash flow means, right?
Yeah.
It's the money that I get out of something. But the reality is that most traditional assets aren't built to create cash flow. They're built for accumulation, and then you're kind of trying to figure out how to bring the cash flow out of it.
Yeah, they have
the alternative side, on the other hand, not the case. What were you going to say?
Well, yeah. So on the traditional side, they have a category that they call income, right?
Yes, yeah, they do.
And so it's like your dividend producing stocks and things like that. But it's different, right? It's just fundamentally different mindset, even though that's kind of what they're saying.
Yeah, and you're still not able to use leverage. Or I say not able, like there are situations where you can like trade on margin. But again, that's atypical. Most people aren't doing that.
Yeah.
Okay. Long and short of it is, though, alternative assets are a really great way to create consistent cash flow. A river. You gotta create the river. Okay, Rod, I'm trying to decide, should we hit on each one of these separately or just kind of generally take from the last three?
Well, maybe it's fair to say in alternative assets, you have different opportunities with these three. So with tax optimization, I mean, as a business owner, you can just do different things than you could if you were not, right? And again, in the traditional space, what does that look like? Well, it usually looks like participating in a 401k, which is just deferring tax. It's just delaying paying the tax. And so could there be some optimization there? Maybe. It depends on how much income you're making later versus how much you're making today, and a lot of whether tax rates go up in the future or whatever. Like, there are a lot of different things out there that could end up putting you in a place where you optimize the tax, but you don't know. A lot of that's out of your control. Whereas in the alternative space, the way you invest in real estate, the way that you can have your expenses right against your income in a business, that just opens up all kinds of different opportunities that you don't have in the traditional space.
So maybe the easiest way to think about it is I buy a piece of real estate and automatically I can depreciate my asset, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As an example, I can use cost segregation analyses. Like, there's different ways that have tax optimization kind of built into what they are. Now, you do have to go in with eyes open and understand how to do those things. Yep. But to the extent that you do a little due diligence on the front end, it's pretty easy to create some like real and significant tax benefits when I'm investing in most of the things that are classified on the alternative side, which
Yep.
Again, juxtapose that against the traditional side, and there's not nearly as much of that.
Yeah.
Okay, Rod. So tax optimization, same thing with asset protection. I think on this one, Rod, the focal point is more about doing it regardless of where your assets are.
Sure.
Right? It doesn't matter which situation. There are some benefits that you can get in alternative assets from an asset protection standpoint. But in general, this takes a little bit more planning. We have to be a little bit more forward thinking. Maybe we've got to go to an attorney and have some trusts and that,
Sure.
LLCs built out, that kind of stuff. But the bottom line is that it's a critical aspect of alternative investing. Making sure that as we're out there investing, we're putting the proper protections in place so that when potential situations come up, we're not left in a difficult situation. Okay, estate maximization is the final one. Rod, hit on that, and then we'll close this thing up.
First, I would say all the things you just said about asset protection are true for estate maximization, because again, you put trust in place, you do these things to make the most of assets as they're transferring. However, let me ask you this. What are the two most effective assets to pass on to the next generation? And in which category do they fall, traditional or alternative?
This is an interesting question because real estate certainly fits in the alternative side. Life insurance is somewhat of a hybrid, I would say. Although the way that we talk about it, teach it and use it, it certainly fits more into a tool used to enhance and increase the returns on. I say that, but we use it for a lot of the traditional stuff too. So it's kind of a hybrid, Rod, but both of those, to your point, are so powerful when it comes to passing money on to the next generation. If you're not using them, you're missing out.
Yeah. Or being very mindful and intentional in the way that you set them up. Because, for example, with real estate, depending on how you own it, when it transfers, the efficiency we're talking about here is the step up in basis. When I pass away and I'm passing real estate to my children, to my heirs, the basis, we get a step up in basis, which just means that now it's taxed based on the value of when I died, not when I originally bought it, whether it was a year ago or 100 years. Well, I guess who knows if I'll live 100 years. But.
Okay, so I'll give you an example. My grandpa passed away. I think he probably bought his house for like $10,000 60 years ago. Sold it for, I don't know, maybe $800,000 or something like that. And the tax basis was, the basis was what he sold it for. So the tax repercussion was basically zero.
Yeah.
So that was nice. I got a little money from my grandpa and didn't have to pay any taxes. Thanks, Gramps, for owning real estate. That's all I'm saying.
Perfect.
Okay, let's finish this thing off. So I think in conclusion, the emphasis here is just to focus on alternative investing as a powerful way to create wealth. And specifically, when we're putting it up against the traditional methodologies that we've seen create so many problems and leave a lot of people in difficult situations, we really believe that the key is to, you like to say this, Rod, take your destiny in your own hands.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah, we're going to be really cheesy. We're going to take our destiny in our own hands. We're going to get in the alternative space. We're going to be thoughtful and intentional in the way that we invest. And again, our experience suggests that successful people who do that get way further ahead than the people who don't.
Agreed.
Okay. Thanks for hanging out with us. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Money Insights Podcast. To learn more about the financial and business strategies discussed in this show, please visit moneyinsights.net. The views and opinions expressed on the Money Insights Podcast are not intended to be individual financial, tax, or legal advice. Always consult with the appropriate advisor before making financial decisions. And if you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This will help others find the show and learn wealth building strategies for themselves. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.